There is a building on Sunset Boulevard that has witnessed more romance, more betrayal, and more power than any palace in Europe. The Beverly Hills Hotel rises at the corner of Sunset and Rodeo Drive, wrapped in salmon pink stucco and surrounded by 12 acres of tropical gardens. When it opened in 1912, Beverly Hills did not yet exist. There were no studios, no red carpets, no industry. Only dust, bean fields, and one man's improbable vision. Over time, the hotel would become the throne room of American celebrity, a place where empires were built over breakfast and undone by sunset. Presidents and gangsters, legends and impostors, artists who reshaped culture, and figures who nearly destroyed it all passed through its doors. For more than a century, fortunes have been made and lost behind those pink walls. Affairs bloomed in the bungalows. Oscar campaigns were whispered into existence in its ballrooms. Through wars, scandals, boycotts, and threats of demolition, the building endured. In 1906, the land that would become Beverly Hills was an expanse of dirt roads and abandoned bean fields, once worked by Mexican laborers for sprawling ranches across the coastal plain. Pepper trees cast thin shadows over ground squirrels and roadrunners. Los Angeles ended miles to the east. The film industry had not yet been born. Hollywood was a modest temperance settlement of church socials and tidy homes. Yet Burton Green, a Michigan oilman who arrived in Southern California in 1900 searching for petroleum beneath the hills, saw possibility where others saw failure. When drilling produced nothing but dust, he found himself in possession of 4,000 acres known as Rancho Rodeo de las Aguas. Investors wanted to cut their losses. Green proposed reinvention. Instead of oil wells, they would build a community designed for wealthy Easterners, chasing sunshine, status, and health. In 1906, Green hired landscape architect Wilbur David Cook to design streets that curved with the natural contours of the land, rather than conforming to the rigid greed of Los Angeles. The sweeping boulevards suggested age and permanence, as though the neighborhood had matured over generations. The development was named Beverly Hills, after Beverly Farms in Massachusetts, a retreat for affluent Bostonians. But elegant street plans were not enough to draw buyers to empty land. Green needed an anchor, a symbol of sophistication that would legitimize the dream. He needed a hotel. Margaret Anderson, a savvy, Los Angeles businesswoman who had built her fortune managing downtown apartment buildings, recognized the opportunity. She agreed to construct and operate a luxury hotel on 12 acres at the intersection of Sunset Boulevard and what would become Rodeo Drive. The location anticipated the future. Sunset would evolve into a primary artery as automobiles transformed Southern California. Architect Elmer Gray was commissioned to design the structure. Trained in the Buick's arts tradition, Gray adapted his sensibilities to California's climate and mythology. He chose the Mission Revival style, evoking a romanticized Spanish colonial past that conveyed heritage and rootedness to newly wealthy clients eager for legitimacy. Construction began in 1911. The hotel would contain 325 rooms, arranged around interior courtyards in a Spanish Manor configuration. 3 stories of reinforced concrete stretched along Sunset Boulevard, clad in distinctive salmon pink stucco. The color was deliberate. Pink would glow against brown hills and blue sky. It would photograph beautifully and remain unforgettable. The landscape was as essential as the architecture. Crews planted 12 acres of imported fantasy Egyptian date palms, Central American banana trees, South African birds of paradise. In a semi-arid climate, the lushness required relentless irrigation from deep wells. The grounds created the illusion of eternal spring, a controlled paradise carved from dryness. The project cost nearly 500,000, an enormous investment in 1912 for a hotel isolated from any established city. Anderson wagered that isolation would soon transform into exclusivity. The Beverly Hills Hotel opened on May 12, 1912. 7 months later, the surrounding community incorporated as an independent city. On opening day, however, it remained largely speculative. Only a few homes dotted the area. Guests arrived by automobile or rode Pacific Electric red cars to Santa Monica Boulevard before hiring carriages to traverse dusty roads. Los Angeles society attended the opening, oil-rich ranchers, ambitious merchants, and Midwestern transplants seeking health and opportunity. The Los Angeles Times praised the hotel as a triumph of California architecture. Within 3 years, forces beyond anyone's imagination would redefine its destiny. In 1915, D.W. Griffith released The Birth of a Nation, a film both technically groundbreaking and morally abhorrent, demonstrating cinema's capacity to command mass audiences. The film industry, previously centered in New York and New Jersey, migrated west in search of sunlight, diverse landscapes, and inexpensive land. By 1917, Hollywood and its neighboring communities had become the epicenter of American motion pictures. The Beverly Hills Hotel stood perfectly positioned, close enough to studios in Hollywood, Culver City, and Burbank, yet distant enough to promise privacy. Privacy became its most valuable commodity. Margaret Anderson established strict discretion. Staff never acknowledged celebrities by name in public. Autograph seekers were barred. Photographers were unwelcome in dining rooms. The unspoken rule was absolute. Whatever occurred within those pink walls remained there. This code of silence formed the bedrock of the hotel's mystique. Douglas Fairbanks was among the first film stars to embrace the property. Recognizing it as a refuge, rather than merely lodging, he made it his base. In 1919, he married Mary Pickford, America's beloved screen idol. They honeymooned at the hotel, instantly cementing its association with glamour. Soon the guest registry read like a roll call of cultural power. Charlie Chaplin occupied suites. Gloria Swanson commanded attention in the dining room. Rudolph Valentino, whose death in 1926 would trigger nationwide hysteria, maintained residence. Will Rogers, the wry cowboy philosopher and one of America's highest paid entertainers, lived there for extended periods. The design of the property enhanced its allure. Beyond standard rooms in the main building, detached bungalows dotted the gardens. Some contained up to 6 rooms and offered total seclusion. Separate entrances and private phone lines allowed stars to entertain, negotiate contracts, or conduct secret romances away from public scrutiny. Tropical foliage absorbed sound and concealed movement. In these hidden spaces, personal dramas unfolded alongside professional triumphs. Margaret Anderson retired in 1928, selling her interest to investors as the hotel entered a new era. By the late 1920s, it had become the unofficial headquarters of the film industry. Directors held court in the lobby. Producers negotiated deals over lunch. Actors signed contracts beside the pool. When the stock market crashed in October 1929, and the Great Depression rippled across the nation, Hollywood remained unexpectedly resilient. Audiences still sought escape in darkened theaters. While luxury hotels elsewhere shuddered, the Pink Palace endured, buoyed by cinema's strange immunity to economic despair. In 1941, a group led by Hernando Cortright and Ben Silverstein purchased the hotel for $1.5 million. Cortright, experienced in managing elite desert properties, understood that Hollywood's power brokers valued informality as much as elegance. Under his leadership, the hotel entered its golden age. His most influential innovation was transforming the dining experience into the Polo Lounge, replacing rigid European formality with a relaxed yet exclusive atmosphere. In this setting, moguls, agents, and stars could broker multi-million-dollar deals over cocktails and lunch. Shielded by discretion, and surrounded by the lush illusion of paradise that had defined the hotel from its beginning. From speculative outpost to epicenter of celebrity culture, the Beverly Hills Hotel evolved alongside the industry it sheltered. Its pink facade became more than a color. It became a symbol of aspiration, secrecy, and power. A monument to a dream that began in dust and flourished in legend. Cortright transformed a modest bar just off the main lobby into an intimate enclave, lined with English writing prints, polished wood, and equestrian memorabilia. The name was strategic branding. There was no polo field anywhere near Sunset Boulevard, but polo suggested aristocracy, money, and inherited power. The illusion was enough. When the Polo Lounge opened in 1941, it quickly became the most consequential room in Hollywood. Studio executives gathered there at breakfast to decide casting and budgets. Agents negotiated contracts over lunch. Screenwriters leaned across leather booths, pitching ideas that might become the next box office sensation. The circular booths were designed with precision, private enough to shield confidential conversations, visible enough to signal influence. Being seen in the Polo Lounge meant relevance. Being absent meant decline. The room developed its own hierarchy. Booth 1, closest to the entrance, belonged to the most powerful figure present. Louis B. Mayer, the formidable head of Metro Goldwyn Mayer, claimed it as his territory. When he arrived for breakfast, the staff seated him there automatically. No one else presumed to occupy it. Before mobile phones existed, the Polo Lounge engineered its own solution to constant connectivity. Long cords snaked across the floor as telephones were delivered directly to booths. Executives conducted negotiations without rising from their seats. Witnesses described powerful men juggling multiple receivers at once, finalizing separate deals while their plates cooled. Darrell F. Zanuck of 20th Century Fox conducted so much business there that he installed a direct phone line from his studio office to his regular booth. If he was not at the studio, he was in the Polo Lounge, and everyone knew exactly where to find him. Even the menu became legend. The McCarthy salad, created in the 1960s, combined chopped greens, turkey, cheese, egg, and avocado, mixed tableside. It was hearty enough to sustain hours of negotiation, yet light enough to preserve sharpness. Decades later, it remains essentially unchanged, a culinary relic of Hollywood's golden age. Beyond the Polo Lounge, the hotel functioned as a long-term residence for the powerful and the famous. Howard Hughes maintained multiple bungalows during the 1940s, using them as business offices and private retreats for actresses he pursued. His eccentricities deepened over time, but as long as the checks cleared, the hotel accommodated him. Elizabeth Taylor occupied Bungalow 5 so often that staff informally renamed it in her honor. She recovered there between marriages, entertained lovers between divorces, and retreated from public scrutiny behind its discreet doors. The guest list extended beyond entertainment. Presidents stayed in suites. Foreign dignitaries used the property as a diplomatic refuge during California visits. East Coast industrialists discovered that proximity to the Beverly Hills Hotel granted access that New York and Chicago could not provide. The hotel was no longer simply a destination, it was a credential. Yet the same discretion that protected reputations also concealed misconduct. Affairs unfolded quietly in garden bungalows. Illegal gambling operations reportedly operated out of certain suites, with silent staff cooperation. Drug use, rarely acknowledged publicly, was an open secret among longtime employees. The code of silence applied universally. A star entangled in scandal trusted that management would not alert gossip columnists. A producer engaged in questionable negotiations believed the hotel's phones were secure. The Beverly Hills Hotel functioned like a sovereign enclave within the entertainment industry, governed by its own unspoken rules. Its cultural dominance peaked in the 1950s and early 1960s, when the studio system still dictated Hollywood's structure. A handful of executives could determine careers with a single phone call. Being seen in the right booth at the right hour could transform an unknown actor into a star. The right place was almost always the Pink Palace. Marilyn Monroe kept a standing reservation during her most tumultuous years. She retreated into the bungalows for days, emerging only for film shoots or carefully orchestrated appearances. Staff anticipated her preferences: fresh flowers daily, champagne chilled precisely. Absolute privacy from the public gaze that both adored and devoured her. Frank Sinatra treated the hotel as an extension of his home. He presided over the Polo Lounge, surrounded by the shifting constellation known as the Rat Pack. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. Their gatherings stretched from midday cocktails into early morning excess. Management overlooked behavior that would have ended other guests' stays. Fame purchased tolerance. The hotel also drew figures from the shadowed margins of American power. Sam Giancana, the Chicago crime boss later linked to covert plots involving Fidel Castro, stayed during West Coast visits. Meetings in secluded bungalows blurred lines between Hollywood glamour and organized crime. The overlap was rarely spoken of openly, yet few were unaware. In March 1964, an incident in Bungalow 8 cast a lingering shadow. A woman was found dead. Authorities ruled the death accidental, and the investigation was brief. No charges followed, but rumors circulated that influential figures had been present, that evidence had vanished, that discretion had edged toward complicity. The hotel never publicly addressed the matter. The bungalow was cleaned, refreshed, and rented anew. Employees either left or learned silence. The woman's name flickered briefly in gossip columns before fading, but among insiders the story endured as part of the hotel's whispered mythology. By the mid-1960s, the Pink Palace's grip on Hollywood culture began to weaken. The studio system fractured. A new generation of filmmakers rejected old hierarchies and rituals. Young actors gravitated toward Laurel Canyon's counterculture rather than Beverly Hills' formality. The Polo Lounge no longer dictated the industry's pulse. Attendance declined. Bungalows sometimes sat vacant. Maintenance slipped from meticulous to adequate. The hotel remained profitable, but its cultural supremacy eroded. In 1954, Ownership had passed to Ben Silverstein for 5 Rs, 5 million. A seasoned real estate and oil investor. Silverstein understood both the enduring prestige of the property and the subtle signs that its golden era might be drawing to a close. The Pink Palace still stood luminous against the California sun. But the world around it was changing, and even institutions built on secrecy and power could not remain untouched forever. When Ben Silverstein died in 1976, his estate faced a difficult calculation: sell while the property still commanded prestige, or hold on and gamble on a cultural revival. The family chose to sell. In 1979, Denver oil magnate Marvin Davis purchased the Beverly Hills Hotel for $135 million, a staggering figure at the time. He pledged another $100 million for renovations and publicly vowed to restore the Pink Palace to its rightful place at the center of Hollywood life. Davis followed through. The bungalows were stripped to their frames and rebuilt with modern amenities, while preserving their historic charm. The Polo Lounge was redesigned to resemble an English gentleman's club, deepening its aura of tradition and power. The gardens were replanted with even more exotic species. Fresh coats of the hotel's signature pink renewed its glow against the California sun. By 1982, the property looked as radiant as it had during its 1950s peak. Then came a decision that altered its destiny. In 1987, Davis sold the hotel for $200 million to Hassan al-Bolkiah, one of the wealthiest monarchs in the world. The Sultan of Brunei presided over a tiny oil-rich nation on Borneo and possessed a fortune estimated in the tens of billions. He collected Rolls-Royces in vast numbers, owned palaces across continents, and now added Hollywood's most storied hotel to his portfolio. At first, the acquisition seemed harmless, even beneficial. Ownership passed through the Brunei Investment Agency, and assurances were made that the hotel's standards, staff, and traditions would remain intact. For years, little changed. The Polo Lounge stayed crowded with executives and celebrities. The bungalows remained coveted retreats. The pink facade continued to symbolize arrival. Everything shifted in 2014. Brunei enacted a strict interpretation of Sharia law that introduced punishments condemned by international human rights groups, including provisions prescribing death by stoning for adultery and same-sex relations, along with corporal punishment for other offenses. The global reaction was swift and fierce. The connection to the Beverly Hills Hotel was direct. Revenue from the property flowed to the sovereign wealth apparatus of Brunei. Critics argued that patronizing the hotel meant indirectly supporting policies that criminalized homosexuality and violated fundamental rights. Hollywood, an industry that publicly championed LGBTQ equality, found itself confronting a painful contradiction. The response was immediate. Jay Leno called for a boycott of Brunei-owned properties, which included not only the Beverly Hills Hotel, but also the nearby Hotel Bel Air and luxury holdings in London and Paris. Ellen DeGeneres, Richard Branson, and Stephen Fry publicly announced they would no longer stay at the property. The Human Rights Campaign formally endorsed the boycott. The effect was devastating. Major talent agencies canceled their regular Polo Lounge meetings. Industry fundraisers relocated. Annual galas and award ceremonies found alternative venues. Occupancy rates plunged dramatically. Within months, the hotel that had once anchored Hollywood's social calendar felt deserted. Employees bore the brunt of the fallout. Many had devoted decades of service to the property. They had no influence over Brunei's legal code, yet watched tips vanish and shifts shrink. Housekeepers cleaned unoccupied rooms. Bartenders served scattered tourists, rather than industry royalty. The management issued statements emphasizing that the staff were American workers, diverse and inclusive, and that punishing them would not change foreign policy. The arguments failed to stem the losses. Industry analysts estimated tens of millions in lost revenue during the first year alone. Occupancy dropped sharply. Bungalows that once required reservations months in advance sat vacant. The Polo Lounge, once the epicenter of influence, served meals to sparse tables. Some observers questioned the effectiveness of the boycott. They argued that the Sultan's oil revenues dwarfed hotel profits, and that the financial pain fell disproportionately on workers rather than ownership. Others countered that symbolism mattered, that withdrawing patronage from a beloved institution sent a powerful moral message. The Beverly Hills Hotel had stood for Hollywood's values for a century. To reject it was to demonstrate that certain principles outweighed nostalgia and convenience. The controversy also forced introspection. For decades, the hotel had protected industry elites through unwavering discretion. It had shielded scandals, affairs, financial misconduct, and darker secrets. Silence had been celebrated when it benefited powerful insiders. Now, silence in the face of oppressive laws felt indefensible. Critics noted the inconsistency of selectively boycotting one property while continuing to conduct business with other governments accused of human rights abuses. The Pink Palace became a focal point for broader debates about hypocrisy and accountability. The Sultan showed no inclination to sell. The hotel's market value had appreciated significantly since 1987. Even diminished revenues were negligible compared to national oil wealth. Ownership could afford patience. As months stretched into years, emptiness became its own spectacle. The building remained immaculate. Its gardens perfectly maintained, yet the absence of industry energy altered its character. A hotel designed for crowds felt cavernous when quiet. Demonstrations gathered outside the entrance on Sunset Boulevard. Activists handed flyers to tourists and amplified their message through social media campaigns. The Beverly Hills Hotel had transformed from Hollywood's throne room into its most visible moral battleground. Inside, operations continued with ritual precision. Rooms were cleaned whether occupied or not. Breakfast was served daily in the Polo Lounge. Palms swayed above manicured lawns. Yet the aura of inevitability that once surrounded the property had dissipated. Entering the hotel carried social consequences. Being photographed there invited scrutiny. Many chose avoidance over controversy. A handful of longtime patrons, often veterans of the studio era, continued to visit. They cited loyalty to staff and personal history. They resisted what they perceived as symbolic politics, dictating private choices. Even their numbers declined as social pressure intensified. Management experimented with survival strategies. Discounted rates targeted leisure travelers. Marketing campaigns emphasized architectural heritage and storied past. International tourists unfamiliar with the controversy were courted aggressively. None of it restored the cultural dominance the hotel once commanded. By 2017, the boycott had become self-sustaining. Avoidance became habit. The Pink Palace, once synonymous with power, now symbolized conflict. The dilemma raised enduring questions about the boundaries of moral responsibility. the limits of protest, and whether a building can ever remain neutral when its ownership is not. The staff had no influence over the policies of Hassan al-Bolkiah. The management team in Los Angeles had no authority over laws enacted in Brunei. Yet they absorbed the consequences of decisions made half a world away. The boycott punished proximity rather than culpability. Some employees left out of frustration or financial strain. Others remained, bound by decades of service and specialized experience that could not easily transfer elsewhere. They waited, believing that Hollywood's attention might fade as quickly as it had ignited. The controversy also exposed the limits of celebrity activism. Many public figures who supported the boycott continued working with corporations operating in countries accused of similar human rights violations. Film studios maintained distribution agreements in restrictive markets. Luxury brands produced goods in nations criticized for suppressing dissent. Technology firms built infrastructure in surveillance-heavy states. Yet the Beverly Hills Hotel became the focal point because it was visible, iconic, and symbolically powerful. In Brunei, there were no signs of policy reversal. International criticism did not produce legislative reform. The boycott that reshaped a Los Angeles landmark did not alter a single statute abroad. The most immediate impact was economic pain for workers far removed from the political decisions at issue. By 2019, 5 years into the boycott, occupancy had stabilized at levels well below historical norms, but high enough to keep the hotel operational. Revenue persisted, though diminished. The Sultan, whose fortune was measured in tens of billions, could sustain losses indefinitely. Meanwhile, Hollywood's focus shifted to new controversies. Some early advocates quietly resumed business at other Brunei-owned properties. Moral certainty softened into pragmatic compromise. The damage to the hotel's identity lingered. For more than a century, the Pink Palace had thrived by offering discretion, luxury, and access to influence. The boycott demonstrated that prestige alone could not shield an institution when political winds changed. The same culture that once valued silence now condemned it. As the boycott entered its 6th year in 2020, a new crisis struck. The COVID-19 pandemic shuttered global travel, halted productions, and canceled events. On March 17, 2020, California Governor Gavin Newsom issued a statewide stay-at-home order. For the first time in its history, the Beverly Hills Hotel closed its doors. The property that had endured world wars and economic collapse went dark. For 4 months, only essential maintenance staff remained. Gardens were watered. Corridors were cleaned. No guests wandered the grounds. No negotiations unfolded in the Polo Lounge. The bungalows stood silent. Since 1912, the hotel had never known such stillness. When it reopened in July 2020, the environment had transformed. International tourism had collapsed. Conferences had migrated online. Film production slowed dramatically. Hotels across the region competed for a fraction of previous demand. Already weakened by years of boycott, the property faced an unprecedented market downturn. The pandemic altered the boycott's momentum. Public activism receded as survival eclipsed symbolism. Demonstrations ended. Social media campaigns quieted. The hotel benefited not from resolution, but from distraction. As travel gradually resumed in 2021 and 2022, a new generation approached the hotel without the baggage of 2014. Younger visitors encountered it primarily through curated images, pink stucco against blue sky, palm-lined pathways, tropical gardens. The narrative shifted from controversy to aesthetics. Management adapted. Marketing emphasized visual appeal and heritage rather than ownership. Partnerships with luxury brands and curated lifestyle events reframed the property as a destination for experience, rather than industry politics. Social media amplified the transformation. The hotel became a backdrop again. By 2023, occupancy approached levels not seen since before the boycott. Bungalows filled months in advance. The Polo Lounge returned to steady service. The hotel did not reclaim its former status as Hollywood's unquestioned throne room, but it secured renewed relevance within a different cultural framework. The recovery underscored a difficult reality about modern activism. The boycott had faded not because policies changed, but because public attention moved on. Brunei's legal framework remained intact. Ownership remained unchanged. What shifted was focus. Some original supporters viewed the revival as moral retreat, arguing that convenience had replaced conviction. Others saw it as confirmation that celebrity-driven campaigns often depend on visibility, rather than sustained strategy. When maintaining outrage conflicted with practicality, outrage diminished. For employees, the return of guests meant restored income. They had never sought to become symbols within a geopolitical debate. Their priority was stability. The episode illustrated the limits of consumer boycotts as instruments of structural change. Targeting a prestigious hotel created visibility and economic impact. But it did not compel reform from a sovereign government, insulated by vast natural resource wealth. The burden fell disproportionately on local workers rather than distant decision-makers. By 2024, the hotel had largely shed its pariah status. A new wave of celebrities hosted events on its grounds. Studios reserved ballrooms for premieres and celebrations. Executives resumed breakfast meetings in the Polo Lounge. The Pink Palace endured, reshaped by controversy, yet still standing on Sunset Boulevard. Proof that institutions built on power and image can falter, adapt, and persist even when their symbolism shifts with time. The Pink Palace was welcomed back into Hollywood's embrace. Not because the past had been resolved, but because remembering required more effort than forgetting. The building remained the same. Ownership remained with Hassan al-Bolkiah. The laws in Brunei remained unchanged. What shifted was the willingness to care. The collapse of the boycott revealed that moral outrage, no matter how forcefully expressed, has a limited lifespan in a culture driven by distraction and constant novelty. The return from controversy required more than patience. Management understood that silence could be more effective than argument. They chose strategic restraint and visual reinvention. Political questions went unanswered. Statements were declined. The property repositioned itself as an architectural landmark and luxury destination, detached from geopolitical debate. This approach allowed guests to return without defending their decision. Significant renovations followed. The bungalows were completely redesigned. Modern technology was integrated across the grounds. The Polo Lounge was refreshed to feel both classic and contemporary. Legally and structurally, nothing fundamental had changed. Yet the updated appearance created psychological distance from the years of protest. Perception shifted before reality ever did. For over a century, the Beverly Hills Hotel succeeded by reading cultural currents and adjusting accordingly. In the 1940s, that meant establishing the Polo Lounge as a gathering place for studio power brokers. In the 1950s, it meant offering private bungalows to stars seeking refuge from publicity. In the 2020s, it meant transforming into a visual icon for a generation that values aesthetic experience over institutional memory. The hotel's social media presence expanded dramatically. Professional photography highlighted its most photogenic angles. Influencers were invited to stay and share curated glimpses of pink walls and palm-lined pathways. For many young travelers planning visits to Los Angeles, the hotel became a destination because of how it appeared on a screen rather than what it once represented behind closed doors. This marked a fundamental shift. For decades, the property derived its power from discretion. Deals were negotiated quietly. Reputations were protected. Privacy was currency. In an era of constant exposure, secrecy lost its premium. The hotel adapted by embracing visibility. Grounds once shielded from cameras became backdrops for them. The pink facade that had witnessed confidential conversations became a public stage. Some longtime industry figures lamented the transformation. They remembered when the hotel functioned as a sanctuary, when influence flowed through the Polo Lounge and privacy could still be guaranteed. Their nostalgia carried limited influence in an industry that had already fragmented. The studio system that once centralized power dissolved into streaming platforms, independent production companies, and technology-driven enterprises. The hotel's original function had diminished before the boycott even began. Cultural amnesia accelerated the recovery. By 2024, many early advocates of the boycott had shifted focus to new causes or stopped discussing the campaign entirely. Sustained activism required persistence that proved difficult to maintain. As attention moved elsewhere, the controversy receded. Employees who endured the crisis developed a different perspective. They had seen their workplace transformed into a political symbol overnight. They experienced financial strain for decisions beyond their control. They witnessed outrage intensify and then fade. Many concluded that public principles often bend under the weight of convenience. Survival also rested on undeniable economics. The 12 acres at Sunset Boulevard and Rodeo Drive represent some of the most valuable real estate in Los Angeles. Even without prestige, the land itself retains immense worth. Financial resilience was possible because the asset beneath the hotel continued appreciating regardless of public sentiment. By 2025, operations returned to pre-boycott levels. Standard rooms began around $700 per night, while the most exclusive bungalows exceeded $10,000. The Polo Lounge required reservations days in advance. Industry gatherings returned to the ballrooms. The Pink Palace reclaimed visibility, though not the centralized authority it once held. The institution that emerged was altered. Its former dominance within Hollywood's power structure had dissipated. What remained was an iconic structure layered with history, serving guests more interested in luxury and aesthetics than in the property's complex legacy. The experience revealed difficult truths about institutional endurance. Loyalty weakens when it becomes inconvenient. Moral urgency diminishes when it conflicts with desire. Public memory competes with the next headline and rarely prevails for long. The hotel survived less by transformation than by outlasting concentrated attention. Today the salmon, pink facade still anchors the corner of Sunset and Rodeo Drive. Tropical gardens flourish despite the climate. Bungalows continue to offer privacy to those who can afford it. From the outside, continuity dominates the view. Internally, the relationship to Hollywood has shifted. The hotel is no longer the nucleus of power. It is a location that power occasionally visits. The Polo Lounge continues serving breakfast, yet decisive industry negotiations now unfold in corporate offices, streaming headquarters, and technology campuses. Celebrities still occupy the bungalows, though privacy in an age of social media and instant communication is fragile. The discretion that defined the property for generations cannot be guaranteed in a world of constant surveillance. The hotel was built for a Hollywood defined by studio control and careful image management. That version of the industry has dissolved into a decentralized landscape of platforms and creators. The building endures because of its location, architecture, and mythology. It functions as a monument to its own narrative. Walk through the lobby and visitors photograph the pink walls. Influencers stage carefully framed moments in the gardens. International travelers arrive seeking proximity to cinematic legend. A handful of industry veterans may still gather at the Polo Lounge, though they are outnumbered by guests, with no direct connection to entertainment, and little interest in revisiting controversy. Most current employees joined after the boycotts peak. They understand the outline of events without carrying its emotional weight. For them, the hotel is a workplace that happens to be famous. They prepare rooms, serve meals, maintain grounds, and conclude their shifts. The institution continues, layered with history yet driven by the practical rhythms of daily operation. Standing as both relic and reinvention within a transformed Hollywood. The mythology surrounding the Beverly Hills Hotel exists separately from the daily experience of its staff and guests. Its history forces a reckoning with complicity and responsibility. For more than a century, the hotel protected powerful individuals who used that discretion to conceal affairs, crimes, and corruption. The same industry that once celebrated that secrecy later condemned the property for its ownership. The moral outrage that fueled the boycott was selective and often hypocritical, yet it also reflected genuine shifts in values. Hollywood in 2014 was not the same as Hollywood in 1954 or 1914. Social movements and public pressure had forced the industry to at least perform a commitment to civil rights. The Beverly Hills Hotel became a test of whether that commitment held meaning. The test demonstrated that the industry could inflict economic consequences, but its convictions were not enduring. The building itself bears witness to these changes. The walls that once absorbed the sounds of opera now capture the clicks of smartphone cameras. The bungalows that sheltered Hollywood legends now host Instagram influencers. The Polo Lounge that brokered studio contracts now serves brunch to tourists. The hotel has survived by transforming into something different while appearing unchanged. Its survival illustrates the nature of institutions. They endure not by preserving their original purpose, but by adapting to serve new ones. The Beverly Hills Hotel no longer defines Hollywood power, which has dispersed into countless locations and exists primarily through contracts negotiated via email and Zoom. Yet the hotel retains value, offering a connection to a mythical past, a place to walk where legends walked, to sit where deals were made, to sleep in beds once occupied by stars. The hotel faces challenges beyond boycotts or politics. Los Angeles has evolved. The city that once revolved around the entertainment industry now hosts technology firms, finance companies, and international corporations. Future generations of wealthy travelers may prioritize contemporary values over nostalgia. The Sultan continues to own the property through his investment company, showing no interest in selling. The hotel remains sufficiently profitable to justify holding it as a long-term asset, with the land alone guaranteeing substantial value. Buildings are more than real estate. They are stories made tangible. The Beverly Hills Hotel embodies ambition and accommodation, power and its limits. The service of the powerful until influence shifts elsewhere. It is a story of discretion, maintained until it became complicity. Survival purchased at the cost of meaning. The Pink Palace stands as a monument to American celebrity culture, reflecting both its glamour and compromises. It has witnessed romance and betrayal, genius and scandal, triumph and tragedy. Presidents and criminals, artists and frauds have all found refuge within its walls. It has survived depressions, wars, boycotts, and a global pandemic. Today, it survives not as Hollywood's throne room or as the center of American entertainment, but as a beautiful building with a complex history. It offers luxury to those willing to pay and overlook where the money flows. Its walls no longer guard secrets, they simply stand salmon pink against the California sky, adding chapters to a story that refuses to end. The Beverly Hills Hotel remains the place where dreams were made and compromises hidden, where power once gathered and eventually dispersed. Hollywood learned to be Hollywood within its walls, and then learned to be something else. Still standing. Still pink.